5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new edition of the Bleav in Bengals podcast presented by FanDuel. I'm your host, Solomon Wilcots. And of course, we're joined by our Cincinnati Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. Charlie, one day removed from the game at Paycor Stadium where the Detroit Lions came in. Look, I thought they had to score 30 points or more in 3 straight games. I thought they were going to get not only 30 points. I thought this would be a much wider margin. But the Cincinnati Bengals, I thought they really showed their toughness. They showed some resiliency. They only lose by 13 points, but Detroit gets their 30 points. And David Montgomery had a wonderful homecoming.
It all does start with the quarterback. And this is a flawed Bengals roster that you can definitely argue that they wouldn't be contenders even if Joe Burrow were healthy. When you look at where Sunday's game got away from them, you look at where most of Monday's game got away from them, you look at where a lot of the Vikings game got away from them, and it just falls back on the quarterback play, and it falls back on turnovers, and it falls back on decision-making, sometimes Browning being too conservative, sometimes way too over-aggressive, and there's just no balance, and that's critical, and that's a must-have in the NFL, and the Bengals don't have any of it.
Well, Zach Taylor, in his press conference, and even today, he said that they're going to examine everything. They're 0-3 with Jake Browning starting. He has 8 interceptions in the 4 games when he's played. It's the second most interceptions. Only Geno Smith of the Las Vegas Raiders, his 9 interceptions, are the only quarterback who has more. What do you sense that the Bengals would do? This is not like you could just open up the wallet and go buy a quarterback. Who's going to come in here and right the ship? Who knows the offense as well as he does? Who knows the nomenclature of the playbook as well as he does? Sometimes you kind of have to live with what you got, don't you?
The thing is, like, what should they do? That's the $1 million question. Well,
yes,
there is not a person on the planet who has any idea of what Brett Rippon, Mike White, or Sean Clifford would look like in the Bengals offense. Like, they've had some scout team reps and some on-air throws, and I'm sure they look great on, after practice against air, but there's just no idea. I doubt if they've ever even, thrown a football for any consistent amount of time with T. Higgins or Jamar Chase. Like, that in itself is a total mystery box with a low ceiling and a low floor. And obviously what you're seeing with Browning now is a low ceiling and a low floor. So they have a decision, but the alternatives are complete. I mean, wild cards isn't even strong enough just because these guys, they barely played in the NFL, let alone played in the Bengals system.
Well, what about the stuff that's blowing in the ether? You watch half these shows. Half of them, I think, are living in the fantasy world of football, not the reality world of football. Because when I hear someone talking about trading for Russell Wilson or trading for Kirk Cousins, I'm like, get out of here. It ain't going to happen. For one, those guys can't even play where they're at right now. Kirk Cousins can barely move. He can't spread the ball around and make you defend the entire field. His arm's not what it was 5 years ago, let alone when he was younger. Russell Wilson can't move, can't run, can't beat out Jackson Dart. But, he's going to come in here and right the ship for the Cincinnati Bengals. We got too many people living in the fantasy football world, Charlie. Now, if I'm wrong, please tell me I'm wrong. Please help me to see something differently, because right now I cannot see one of those older guys coming in here and playing behind the Bengals offensive line right now.
Here's how I look at it too. If they have a cent left of cap space that they can use, if there were like a break in case of emergency fund, you should have broken that fund about 2 months ago and gotten an offensive guard. Like, if there was this money that you'd been saving away somewhere that would give you the flexibility to add someone, and I know Russell Wilson has a lower cap hit, but Kirk Cousins obviously has a big one. But even Russ, those few $1 million should have been all hands on deck even months ago to address the offensive guard position. So where they're at this very second from a cap perspective is more of a question. But it should be zero because they went into this season knowing where they were at offensive guard, and it's failed.
It really has. There's no doubt about it. Hey, look, this portion of the show is brought to you by heroes.com. Of course, you can get your tumbler, heroes.com. And of course, it is the Bleav in Bengals tumbler where you can keep things either hot or cold. It's just like everyone at heroes.com. This is about celebrating heroes in our community and in our workplace and in our society. So go to the website, use the QR code at the bottom of the screen to go to heroes.com, order your tumblers today. We have a question in our mailbag that we're going to read, and then we're going to give one out and get one out to you. But I want to ask you also, about the Bengals offense, because in some way, shape, or form, and I think we saw some improvement in this last game against Detroit. I thought for a minute it was going to get ugly. I mean, it looked like Jake couldn't even hit the receivers when they were open. I mean, he threw it closer to the defender than he did the intended receiver on the outbreaking route to Jamar Chase. He threw it closer to Amik Robertson. That's why he intercepted it. Jamar's running deep outside. He threw it inside, and it gets intercepted by Kerry Joseph. There was a route that T. Higgins ran beautifully. All you got to do is lead him across the middle of the field. T's going to run under it. He might even score a touchdown, but you got to lead him away from the defender. He threw it back over the back shoulder. That pass, it should have been intercepted. Is Jake going to get better? And if he doesn't get better, then they better start getting one of these other guys ready, because I think it got better by the time we got to the fourth quarter. But there was a minute there that I'm thinking, this is not good. It does not look pretty. Thanks to Jake Browning. He did improve going into the final quarter of the game, where they did score 21 points in the final frame.
Sorry to be a tough grader, but I'm not
okay.
putting too much of a moral victory into the fourth quarter from the Bengals' perspective.
Yeah.
And they aren't either. I mean, Zach Taylor, whenever he talks about that from yesterday and on Sunday and Monday, he keeps saying the line like we scored 3 points. And yes, they ended up with, 17 or 21 or whatever it ended up being.
24 points.
But 24, there you go. 3 late touchdowns. They had the 1 to T at the end and the 2 to Jamar.
Yeah.
But in his mind, they scored 3 points. And when you're down 28-3, the Lions shut down. Browning, even his first 2 touchdowns were a play where a Lions corner didn't know what he was doing, and just a hero desperation ball to Jamar that honestly on first down, Browning shouldn't have even thrown. He shouldn't even put the ball in harm's way in that spot. And he got it there. But I think really when you boil this game down, it's a game where the Bengals scored 3 points. And that's the data they're going to be operating with going forward.
How concerned should we be? I got to say it, with the offensive line. It seems to be struggling all the way across. Look, they essentially had gone, 154 games or something like that, 145 games without giving up a safety. In this game, they gave up 2. One didn't count because the quarterback was holding, but then one did count in the fourth quarter when the linebacker, Derek Brooks, just went right over the top of Dylan Fairchild. He is a rookie. He has had some good moments this season. I don't want to take away from his accomplishments, but that was not one of his stellar moments. But in a game where you give up 2 safeties, 2 of them, when you went 145 consecutive games without giving one up, that's just a half of it. The inability to run the football is another portion of it, and the inability to protect the quarterback makes it a trifecta of horrible play up front on the offensive line. And you can't just go bring a whole nother group in here. And if that area doesn't get better, it's going to be hard for the offense to get better.
And I think Browning as a whole just isn't quite at the same spot he was at in 23. But the other big difference is in 23, Browning was playing behind a pretty good line. And the Bengals offensive line's in bad shape right now. And just the way that changes how you feel on every snap. You can feel that with Jake right now, and I think the line's impacting him and is shaking his ability to maximize whatever he is able to give you right now. I mean, Dylan Fairchild he has some very concerning moments in every game in terms of, stuff you wouldn't want to see from your starter, in terms of those kind of wow moments on a negative side. And then Jalen Rivers looks like a guy who's still learning guard. And Orlando Brown has uncharacteristic losses that we're not used to seeing. and Ted Karras is struggling getting out in space against games and on screens. So it's just not a line that's in good enough shape right now, and it's impacting every segment of the offense.
What are we hearing from Scott Peters? What has he said? Has there been any, I think Scott Peters is a respected offensive line coach. He came over, as you well know, studied under the great Bill Callahan when he was with the Cleveland Browns. And I think Scott's really good as a technician. There's really good things. The offensive line seems to have regressed as a unit. I can't think of one player that's ascended above where they were 1 year ago. What's to be said there?
Not much. You even look at it too, like even on paper, it's a group with 2 mid-round picks at guard and center, a center and a left tackle who are more, I don't want to call them later in their careers, but you know what I'm saying there, who maybe they've just dropped off a bit this season. That's what the tape's shown us. And then Mims has had some moments, but hasn't quite made the leap. So it's a group that's underperforming expectations. It's a run game that hasn't gotten going schematically or execution. There are moments where these guys look passive and a lot to be desired. And, put that on Scott Peters. And then, of course, you put that on Zach Taylor, Dan Pitcher, Duke Tobin, all the way up the totem pole. I don't put it on just one coach. I look at all these organizational decisions that have been made over the last however many years you want to go.
What's the thought over at Paycor Stadium right now in terms of, it seems like another year that we're going to really waste the talents of some really good players. I think it's quite clear that the Bengals roster isn't as talented as maybe we was led to believe, or at least that we thought even by our own evaluation, right? But you still get the sense that there's still some great players on this roster, but yet for another year, we're trending toward a third straight season of not making the playoffs. What's the thought on just the overall makeup of the roster and what's to be done about it ahead of the trade deadline? Because let's face it, you can do some things to improve your future if you can improve your present.
You just look at the Bengals' recent history here. And, this is every team in football that's under 500. But like in the back end of the 2000s, the Bengals were quote unquote wasting. You had Carlos Dunlap, you had Geno Atkins, you had AJ Green. When they were bad for those years in the late 2000s, you had Andrew Whitworth and Willie Anderson. And I bet there's some other players you could find who are great on those rosters, as Ocho Cinco, of course. That's just football.
I long for those days now. I long for those days. Those are pretty good names you just reeled off.
That's football. And now that, and in 2024 and 2025, that's been, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Trey Hendrickson. And they're great players who aren't set up with enough around them to be on a winning team. And I guess the Bengals had a winning record last season, but you get the point I'm making. The Bengals have a long history of not being sellers at the trade deadline. The 2019 Bengals are the most obvious example of that. The only one to trade would be Hendrickson. I don't know. I really don't. If I checked in last week, well, a lot's changed in the last week anyway in terms of how they'd be viewing that. So we'll see how they check in a couple weeks from now, but it'd be against everything the Bengals have how they've operated. Now, it would be the right move being sellers at the deadline when you're in that spot. That would analytically be the thing you should be doing, but it's not something I'd expect.
Yeah. Look, so at some point you got to start playing checkers and not chess when it comes to team building, when it comes to, planning for the future. Right. And at the end of the day, that's what it's really all about, putting yourself in the best position to be able to build the team that has a future. And it really, I think, would bode well for them to begin to at least make those considerations. Speaking of the defense, speaking of Trey Hendrickson, contributed to the Bengals getting 4 sacks on Jared Goff. I thought they did a really good job. He had 3 touchdowns, no interceptions in this game. He was more methodical than he was spectacular. He did get a touchdown pass from David Montgomery. So in all, they had 4 touchdown passes against the Bengals defense. But I do think that this is probably one of their best games at applying pressure to the opposing quarterback. What was your thoughts and what was the talk about right now? Because I do think Al Golden's defense stepped up big, at least early in the game. They didn't get the major stops, but they did slow down what had been a red-hot offense coming in on Sunday.
I give Al a lot of credit because coming off the week 2 game, he sat in his, interview room with the media and he was like, third down defense, it's a problem. I'm going to fix it. It's on me. We're going to do this. And then you look at the last couple of weeks, and I know the final scores have been ugly, but blame the turnover battle on that. The concepts, the creativity, the execution, for the most part, there were 3 plays last week that were exceptions. I don't think there were a ton in Minneapolis. I still have more work to do to kind of analyze and dissect those plays, but definitely it felt on the whole over the last 3 weeks they have fixed and corrected and come up with an identity of who and what they want to be on third down. And that's good. That's a win. That's adjustments. That's coaching. That's players gaining more confidence in the system. That's rushing coverage working together. That's good football. And that's been an impressive development during a bad month of Bengals football.
And Charlie, I think we have to also, because we look at Detroit scoring 30-plus points, and we say, okay, what's the difference? We're sitting here throwing out a couple of bouquets to the Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator, Al Golden. But I think it's warranted simply because we have to factor in turnovers, what we call sudden change situation. When Meek Robertson intercepted that ball, they were already in Cincinnati Bengals territory in the red zone. And you're getting this high volume of turnovers by the offense, putting the defense in a really, really bad spot. Yeah, you got to turn some of those into stops. But you and I both know a high volume of those are going to really yield good moments for the opponent. And the Bengals defense have been put in that situation a lot of times during the first 5 games of the season.
It's funny too, because after a couple of these, sudden changes, Al Golden will be like out on the field, basically firing the defense up as they come on. You can only do that so many times. You can only you can kind of only pull that card once. It's tough. Now the defense has things it needs to do better too. Tackling and coverage on kind of plays underneath in space and screens has been a consistent theme that's popped up over the course of the season. They've got to be kind of more downhill tacklers, setting the point of attack as the play gets up the field in those types of positions. But on the whole, I feel better about Jordan Battle, Dax Hill, Demetrius Knight, Miles Murphy, even Shamar Stewart, even though he's been hurt, than I did at the start of the season. There are a couple guys, Barrett Carter, who are starting to come on. And while, Cam Taylor-Britt, Geno Stone, Logan Wilson been struggling, throw Chris Jenkins in there. On the whole, you are seeing enough of a positive to where, all right, if this were a Bengals offense at a level it should be operating at, you'd be getting enough from your defense.
Where are you sensing from the coaches? Where are the areas of specific disappointment where they feel like they really have to drastically improve right away? What is the major point of emphasis for either change or for improvement?
Well, you start with tackling, and that showed up mostly this past week. If you want to look at a broader theme, you can look at Cam Taylor-Britt, whose role has continued to be reduced, and who just has to have more consistent approach, technique, details in man-to-man coverage, and tackling with him as well was an issue that popped up, especially in Denver. Those would be 2 main things. Then interior pass rush, I'd say, is a third. Where they're just not getting enough disruption right now, something that can kill a play when the play you're running doesn't necessarily operate the way you want it to.
We have a question from our mailbag, Charlie. I want to read it to you and give us both a chance to answer. I'll allow you to answer first. And it's from @JoeLind. He says a couple of things. Were the preseason expectations for the Cincinnati Bengals too high? He also asks, is this a Zach Taylor, Mike Brown, or player development issue, or all of the above? And he says he's a glass half full person and that he thinks that we can still win the division. What do we think? I'll go ahead and take that last one. I think the division is slipping away, but we got to come out of the tailspin pretty quickly. What's your thoughts on his comments about expectations being too high as we were going through the preseason, and is it a coach or front office kind of issue?
Well, my expectation, kind of because of how they got there, was if this defense can give them a chance and Burrow performs at an MVP level, which is reflective of an ideal offensive setup around him, then the Bengals will be in a good spot to not contend with the Bills and I guess not the Chiefs and Ravens anymore, but to challenge them. I still think that, like, if Burrow played yesterday, he would have thrown for 400 yards. The Lions corners wouldn't have stood a chance. The Bengals would have beat one of the best teams in the NFC. You'd look at the lack of competition in the AFC behind the Bills, and you'd feel like the Bengals had a real shot if Burrow had a good day on any given Sunday against any team. You rip Burrow out, and that's just how important he's been, and because of the way the front office and the coaching staff has unsuccessfully assembled the offensive line, assembled the defensive line, assembled, you look at the lack of development at corner and safety, and now you keep going through these areas and positions on the roster, then you see all these broader issues that prevented the Bengals from being a full stamp Super Bowl contender in the first place.
I think the Bengals, if they were playing at a very high level and undefeated right now and trending toward the playoffs, we would be giving and checking all the boxes, I think, at every single level. I think we would be saying this is great ownership. This is great organizational structure. I think we would be talking and throwing bouquets at the front office. I think we'd be saying that the head coach is doing a great job and that the staff in general were doing a great job. And I think anytime you underperform at this level, and obviously you got to factor in the Joe Burrow injury, but look, we've seen this team overcome the loss of Joe Burrow and still be competitive. We're not the win-loss record. I think you could stomach that maybe not being the same by maybe about a 3-game margin, but you do expect the team to be more competitive. And I think if they were playing at a very high level, just how we would spread the love, I think we got to also spread the accountability for it not going well. And I think organizations like this have to look at what's going wrong. And I think they have to be honest with themselves, Charlie. I think you got to say why we were intent on building it around this great quarterback and why that sounds good and great. And when he's healthy, it is good and great. We know this. That isn't the best thing when we know the best teams win championships, not the team with the best quarterback. Not the team that can't block, that can't tackle, that doesn't have a great running game, but still has the great quarterback. Even Tom Brady had teams that could run the football. I remember Corey Dillon was on one of those championship teams, right? They always could play great defense. My good friend Teddy Bruschi, when I talk with him all the time, he'll tell you that it was some of the defense. It was the defense that carried those teams during the early years in Tom Brady's career in New England. And so I think we have to ask ourselves that we need to be honest, that is this a roster that's well built and is it flexible enough to be able to play with and without the quarterback, Joe Burrow? And I think it's already a resounding no. It's hard. I think that question's already been answered. And I think, to me, the next step would have to be, let's figure out how we could be more flexible with our roster, where we can play one style if we have to on Sunday with Joe Burrow, or if we had to play another style when it's windy and rainy and muddy in Cleveland and the wind is blowing the ball sideways. If we have to win, even with Joe Burrow in a game like that, if we have to win in a different style of fashion, can we play that way and still win games? I think that's a fair question. And I'm not casting aspersions on anyone here. I don't think anyone should take this harshly. I think it's a really good question to ask yourself at this point in time.
The miscalculation here was that, in August, if you would have asked 100 Bengals fans, 100 Bengals coaches, 100 anybody, do you feel good about Jake Browning as this team's backup quarterback? I think everyone would have said yes. I mean, that was all the information we had. That's what we'd seen. We just saw it in training camp and in the preseason.
Yeah. And
then it just didn't carry over. So you could have had the best plan on the planet for the Jake Browning offense in 2025, running all the under center play action that your heart could desire. But Brown was just not operating that. And the part of the Bengals plan that failed was so far been their confidence in Browning, but that was something that seemingly was, very tough to predict. I didn't see it coming. I don't know if you saw it coming, and that has the Bengals stuck without a run game to support them, without a screen game to support them, without a defense that can win them games, and on and on and on and on we go.
And I do think if you couldn't predict it would happen, you certainly have to understand that that kind of flexibility to do some of the things that you just mentioned has to be part of what you're building as you move forward. This is the Bleav in Bengal podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, we are going to talk about what's next as we look ahead. And of course, this segment is brought to you by Anjanette France and the people at Sipsey Klein Realty. Of course, she is the realtor that you want and need. Use the promo code to reach out to her. She makes all the plays for the playmakers, and she is your playmaker in the world of real estate, both residential and commercial. The Green Bay Packers coming off a bye week, and the Bengals are heading to Lambeau week 6 to take on that Packers team, where you and I both know Micah Parsons and Jordan Love will be waiting. What do you expect? What catches your mind as you look ahead to this game, Charlie?
Well, it's the defensive line, and it's Micah Parsons, and him being, I mean, you can make the case certainly that Myles Garrett's the better defensive end, but Micah Parsons' versatility is something that I don't know if even Garrett can match, especially when you look at Parsons' ability to line up off the ball. So his ability to seek out mismatches and chase Jake Browning down, that's probably, that's got to have you up at night if you're the Bengals game planning for what this week's going to look like.
At last blush, we saw the Green Bay Packers defense give up 40 points to Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys 1 week ago. Of course, week 5 was a bye week. They'll be well rested as they play host to the Cincinnati Bengals week 6 on Sunday at Lambeau Field. Jordan Love, Micah Parsons, they have Josh Jacobs, really good rushing attack, and a really good defense that could give our offensive line a lot of problems on Sunday. We got to leave right now. We want to thank you for joining us on this wonderful edition of the Bleav in Bengals podcast presented by FanDuel. He is Charlie Goldsmith. I'm Solomon Wilcots. Don't forget to join us next time, everyone. Thank you.